Welcome back to Ask an Actuary. Today I've got Francis Fraine here, and we're talking about something a lot of municipalities are thinking about once they establish an OPEB trust. Now what? More specifically, how do you decide how much to contribute and what funding strategy actually makes sense? So, Francis, to start simply, when a municipality sets up an OPEB trust, what's the main goal when it comes to funding it?
So one of the main goals is to just, be a little bit more solvent to be able to fund the liability. But one of the big things, one of the big changes going from GASB 45 to GASB 75 was that the municipalities can use the amount that they're funding to help determine the discount rate. So the more they fund, the higher the discount rate they can use, and the higher the discount rate they use, the lower the liability. So from a balance sheet standpoint, there's very big incentive for them to be funding as much as they reasonably can.
Absolutely. And a lot of people, it seems, just assume the answer is to set it and forget it. So almost fund the ADC every year and you're good to go. But why isn't it always that simple?
So honestly, in an ideal world, that is what everybody would do. But of course, we're not in an ideal world. And the thing is, it just comes down to you could just say, "Hey, we'll just tax everybody $1 million. Problem solved." And you'll have people banging at your doors with pitchforks and tar and feathers, and that's not going to work out well for you. And just in general, trying to do something like uh, just the ADC for the most part, it's going to be a little bit too much for most municipalities. And there's just a lot of moving parts with the municipality. Like let's look at a town, for example. Let's say you're committing to the ADC, and then you need a new fire truck. Well, are you really going to be able to meet that promise that you set up if you're buying a new fire truck and also putting in a town pool or any number of things that could get in the way of that? So we try to do is just kind of encourage people to, do something that they can manage year to year consistently and not, get in a little bit over their heads in their promises.
Yeah, that makes sense. Absolutely. And I mean, just like you mentioned, municipalities, that's the real world scenario is that municipalities are balancing OPEB with a lot of other real budget priorities, like a new fire truck or, maybe they're have school updates, things like that. How much does the bigger financial picture matter when deciding a financial strategy for this?
I mean, that's everything right there is the bigger financial picture. You can't just be like, oh, okay, well, put X amount towards this regardless of everything else that's happening. That's just not realistic. So that kind of that does kind of determine everything is what else is going on. And so what we do is we encourage clients to set up a schedule where they don't need everything to be perfect to follow it. And there are going to be years where they're not going to be able to meet the obligation that they set for themselves. But for the most part, let's say 4 out of 5 years, whatever they set up is something that they can realistically follow consistently. And that way, when the rating agencies look at what they're doing, they look at it favorably versus, let's say, a municipality that does what I said earlier, where they just say, we're just going to do the ADC, and they do it maybe 1 out of every 5 years. And of course, I'm sure the rating agency will look at that and be like, they're really not following that. We're not going to really, you know, allow this discount rate that they're using to be what determines the liability. And we would assume that that would reflect in their bond rating.
And from what you're seeing on your side, what are some of the most common funding strategies that municipalities are using right now?
So honestly, the most common one that we see is just flat funding, just something like, and it's not a number pulled out of nowhere. Of course, it again goes back to the bigger picture of their financial, the total financial pieces that they have. But we usually see something, a town, let's say, with a $10 million liability might just say, "Hey, we'll do $500,000 a year, or maybe even just $50,000 a year." Sometimes that's increasing, sometimes it's not. But that's still that's usually something along the lines of what we see.
And we've had one come up more recently in the past years, especially with our annual OPEB trend report. We've been talking about it a lot more, but we've been seeing a lot about post pension funding. Can you explain what that is and why it's becoming more popular?
Yes, so that is especially in Massachusetts right now. So a lot of our Massachusetts clients, they're getting very close to having their pensions 100% funded. So I in an ideal world, what that means is, let's say you have a town that's putting aside $2 million a year for their pension. What we would say is, okay, so let's say in 8 years you're going to be fully funded with that pension, so that'll free up those $2 million. So let's say, again, go back to put aside the $50,000 today to show the rating agencies and your taxpayers that you're committed, and then take a portion of what you were putting towards that pension into the OPEB trust. So maybe $1 million of it. And then that usually gets people reasonably well funded in a fairly short amount of time. And we generally encourage the municipalities to not do the full boat in there. Be just again going back to what we talked about before, you don't want people banging at your doors with pitchforks. So the taxpayers generally, once they achieve a goal, want to see some kind of a, hey, pat on the back, good job, because they really did, pay a lot of money to fund a liability that was accrued in the past, and we're asking them to keep doing that. So we just try to be realistic and say, maybe not the full boat. If you can do the full boat, great. But again, we're not the ones telling the taxpayers that they have to do it. So we don't blame anybody for, just doing a portion of it and not the whole ship.
And just to wrap up with our last question here, for a municipality that wants to start making progress but knows that they can't commit to something aggressive, where is a realistic place for them to begin?
So a realistic place to begin is just a portion of free cash that they have at the end of the year. It's not ideal because you're rarely going to fully fund the liability. Generally, not going to get much of a higher discount rate because of it. Because we can't, if we just say free cash, we can't just say, oh, it's going to be, let's say, $500,000 if, 1 year is 500,000, the next year it's 0, and then the year after that it's $20,000. But just to get something going, and that way years down the road, if they are able to be a little bit more, uh, the funding's a little bit more substantial than they initially thought, then we can start using the higher discount rate. So at least just something to get things going to establish the trust. Again, it's not going to be perfect, and in the short run, it might not raise the discount rate, but at least shows somewhat of commitment to funding.
Right. And I mean, as the old saying goes, something's better than nothing for sure.
Hmm. Yeah,
Great insights as always, Francis. Thank you for hopping on with us and answering some questions.
absolutely. Thanks for having me.
For our viewers, if you want to learn more about OPEB funding strategies and what might make sense for your municipality, be sure to check out our website, which I will link below. And as always, if you have any questions that you'd like to see featured on Ask an Actuary, you can drop them in the comments below or send us a message. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.